Hello everyone, welcome to Lecture 3 of Methods of Agricultural Research for crop science majors. I hope that everybody is well and healthy and getting into the groove or rhythm of your online classes. Now before we proceed, I'd like to share with you this wonderful book entitled Tales from an Itinerant Agronomist, written by David Gibbon. David Gibbon is, of course, the itinerant agronomist. Itinerant means that somebody who travels from place to place, and that seems to be a very interesting life. I really am interested of this book also, especially with what is written on the cover, learning from people, places, and writings for a more equitable, systemic, and sustainable world. And because of, what's happening around us, it really is good to have some break sometimes, and for me is a wonderful break, and I'm hoping to get a copy of this book soon. And yeah, hopefully you too would be interested of this book. So moving on. Changing the game. I would like to remind you first of the challenge that I posted to all of you when we started this class, and that is to be game changers. You learned from Lecture 2, which was given to you as a self-learning kit or as a module, how valuable research is. And a lot of research results have led to improving the quality of life, have led to a lot of technological developments. And even if, for example, we are still a developing country and the Philippines still has a lot of challenges and difficulties, especially in the field of agriculture, and crop production is still very challenging. Food security is still a goal for our country. But exactly that's the point. As a developing country, there are so many opportunities for you and for us to help change the game and to change the game for the better. And one of the key ways to train ourselves to be thinking as game changers is to think about making things better. And making things better is about innovation. Just like this person here. So I saw this person over the weekend parked on the highway. And the moment I saw him, I pulled out my camera immediately because I said, he is going to be a very good example for my class on methods of research. Just looking at this picture, I knew that before he wanted to address two concerns, the need for shade and the need to find ways to pack things up, whatever he would be buying, in a very efficient, effective, safe way. And I think he just did that. Maybe it's a little bit crude still, but I believe it's very effective. So if somebody can do this for these small concerns, I am very, very sure that there are just so many ideas. There's a rich garden of ideas that we could go into when it comes to how we can improve crop productivity in our communities and in our country. So this is innovation, and when we think about innovation, it's better to have a complete picture of what innovation should be. So this is something I borrowed again from the internet. So to do the entire process of innovation, you always start with an idea or ideas, and you go through the process of trying it out and going through a phase of development, employing a lot of your creativity, finding a lot of inspiration, and trying to actualize the vision in your brain of something that is better. And eventually, when that happens, there is definitely growth. Growth in terms of your character and in your competence. You will become confident that you are capable of making things happen. And whenever people see of the better things that you have created, I am sure, absolutely sure, that some would buy to your idea, copy your idea, just like the person here in the picture, And perhaps some even would try to innovate this innovation or your innovation. And that ultimately would make things even better. Just like this. This is actually an old technology, but I believe that when it was first introduced, this was one awesome technology. And I continue to believe that even until now. So, you know that this is called square foot gardening, and it addresses two things: the lack of space and the need to grow diverse crops. So often that's the case for urban spaces, but this technology is already adopted even for the rural areas. And there's a good book written by Mel Bartholomew on square foot gardening, and he says it's a new way to garden in less space with less work. So innovations like this. But I did wonder why I never saw something like this established by students in the basic crop sciences. Anyway, I'm also tweaking the idea that perhaps this can also be innovated by you through a laboratory learning activity. So, yep, we'll wait for that. And another reminder that the ability to solve problems logically is an important life skill or hack. This could be one of the answers you could have in that one essay question in the quiz we had last week. And again, our problem-solving skill would allow us to be confident, to have courage, and to be an optimist. And we really need a lot of optimists. An optimist is a person who is inclined to be hopeful and to expect the best possible outcomes from situations. Technically speaking, this is one of the admirable traits of many great scientists, that they are optimists. So this was the cover of the self-learning kits, and lecture 2 was provided to you as SLK number 2 on research, its meaning, characteristics, value, and purpose. I hope that everybody had really read through the content of SLK number 2. And as your guide, make sure that you would be able to really do or accomplish each of the 10 objectives provided to you for SLK number 2. Pero dahil makulit ako, let me remind you of the importance of research to us. Just like the illustrations on the left, research outputs have made people and their lives better and more comfortable. And I believe that every one of us dreams to see our own families like this. So there's actually a list of 14 importance or values of research to humanity. But technically, there is more, especially if we provide more details. And I don't have to repeat this, I don't have to read it one by one, but I would like to emphasize how valuable research is to us and the outputs, and especially if we put emphasis on good, great research. And that's the reason why you are trained and you will be trained to do good research. If we are to make an assessment or a survey of the challenges we have for the agriculture sector in the Philippines and some other countries in the world, perhaps the list would be 5 slides long or even more. And I'm going to present only one slide that lists the major needs and problems in the agriculture sector that demand research or scientific inquiry. And if we dissect, kung hihimayin natin bawat isa, if we dissect each need, there will be plenty more concerns that would be listed. And each of these actually is a possible thesis problem for agriculture students, and not only for agric students but for other students who are pursuing relevant fields or allied fields to agriculture. But just like the picture that I have included in the slide, although there are problems as indicated by a drought field, there's always that ray of sunshine and hope. And being trained in research means that we could really develop our skills. And aside from that, we would grow in courage and optimism that we could really contribute to these particular problems. So we start with improving crop productivity, both in quality and quantity. There's also a lot of concerns on storability and perishability of produce. Definitely when we talk about biotic stresses and abiotic stresses, so we talk about climate proofing our planet, climate proofing our crops. There are many pathogens, viruses, fungi, bacteria, and right now we are of course having this adjustment in our learning because of a biotic stress to humans, and that is the virus COVID-19. And now there are new strains of the virus, so I hope that we understand how critical it is to utilize what we know in biology regarding the difficulty of fighting off this particular virus. And going back in terms of abiotic stresses, we are feeling a lot of the changes, the effects of the changes in the climate now. We still have perennial problems on soil erosion and infertile soils and more. One of the problems of farmers, many farmers, is still the lack of capital, and again, expensive farm inputs, low buying price, supply and demand, poor infrastructures, from the farm to market roads and other facilities needed. We have poor, inappropriate, and old technologies. Many farmers are still using 1,000-year-old technologies in their farms. And one of the most difficult to address is really having poor mindset and attitudes of some farmers. And again, this one. We have a lot of resources, both plants and animals and other species, but they are largely underutilized or neglected, and so we haven't optimized their usefulness. And these are just some of the things that we could really explore and think, in what way can we contribute? And we contribute by doing a very specific research on each of these particular demands. And ultimately, even if you're still students, you already contribute to addressing many of the problems or needs of the agriculture sector. Actually, I'm going to reiterate some key points in SLK number 2 just to make sure that we are on the same page. So the first one is on the two schools of thought of science. Science is a body of knowledge. So for example, if we talk about agronomy or plant breeding or horticulture or crop science in general, and even agriculture, the biggest umbrella of science we have, the more research is being done, the more research findings that are being published or shared, the bigger the bodies of knowledge of these sciences become. And it means that we know more. And when we know more, then we should be more empowered to do something. The second is that science is an efficient process of knowledge discovery and problem solving. Let me repeat that. Science is an efficient process of knowledge discovery and problem solving. So we just finished off going through a long list of major problems and needs in agriculture that demand scientific research. And that is exactly the basic rationale of this entire course. Why you are being trained to do research. And it's because we are hoping that even as students and eventually when you become valuable human resources, you would contribute and you really value the importance of discovering knowledge that is helpful for agriculture and viable, possible solutions to many of the concerns we have. So the second is on the 3 aims of science. Depending on whose book you are reading, there could be more than 3 aims, but let's settle with this. The first is description. So what, where, when, who. This is the first level of knowledge, okay? For us to be able to identify things, for us to be able to describe things. So you have had many experiences being asked to memorize names of crops, their scientific names. You were asked to identify seeds, weeds, pathogens, insects, etc. Because description is the first flavor or level of knowledge. But there is more than that, and that's the second general aim of science, to be able to explain, or explanation. So the whys and the hows, those are the meat and the substance of many things. And that's why you have subjects like physiology, crop or seed physiology, the physiology of stress, and the physiology of many things, and of course genetics, and many of these pure basic sciences that attempt to really build up your knowledge when it comes to knowing the mechanisms of things. Because if I'm going to think of a cake, the description is just the icing on the cake. The real cake is explanation, the whys and the hows. The third general aim is prediction. Okay, most of our farming and crop production is still being done outside in the field, and we know how unstable the field conditions are. So science enables us the power to have prediction. What will happen if there will be less rain? What will happen if both biotic and abiotic stresses would come and really affect our crops in the field? What will happen? What will happen if we try this particular solution? And that's why when we do research, we have the opportunity to do all these 3 things, okay? To be able to describe, to explain, to predict, especially when we do experimentation. And in research, we would have additional knowledge, and we would be able to really go through an efficient process of knowing things and trying to solve many concerns. Still on SLK number 2, remember that there was a listing on types of research. So basically, I just provided you a listing of the very simple types of research: basic, applied, developmental. And other books would also list historical type of research, descriptive, and definitely experimental. And you were made to search for more types of research based on whose references you are looking into. And that became part of your assignment. And when it comes to classification of research, especially on where you would be conducting it, definitely. So you have field research, laboratory research, library, or online research. Most of the crop science people would be doing field research, but you can actually do survey, experiment, case studies, or even mixed of these classification. And some of us would do laboratory, or we could do both lab and field research. Okay? And definitely the library research and the online research would be part of the process, especially when we prepare our reviews of literature. You also learn about the research variables. The most prominent would be the independent variable and the dependent variable, as well as the intervening variable. And you could go back actually and review them. And I think the last part of SLK was on presenting to you the components of the research process so that you have the big picture on the whole journey of doing research. And just to remind you again of the entire research journey that I hope you will be excited to pursue before you graduate from CMU. I just copied and pasted figure number 6 from SLK number 2, and it's a very straightforward presentation of the steps of the entire research journey, and I provided you some description at each step. So it starts with reading, talking, observing, listening, watching, basically just capitalizing on your curiosity, because when you do it, then you actually could see many possibilities on your research journey. And again, developing the skill of raising, asking, forming questions, clarifying the research problem and objectives, and then forming the concept, the theoretical and conceptual framework of your research. What are the important concepts that come into mind and how they are interconnected to one another when you start building up an idea you are interested to pursue as a research study. And of course, coming up with the research design, how to do the data collection properly, how to do the data processing, and a lot of statistical analysis to be done. And of course, making use of the results of your analysis, writing your manuscript, and making summary conclusions and recommendations, and eventually presenting, sharing research results. So this is the entire straightforward process, and we hope to go through these steps, at least some of the major steps in this semester. And other people also present the research process in a different way. So for this particular graphic, research is presented as a cyclical thing. And indeed, you learn from SLK number 2 that research is cyclical. You start with a research question and you could end up with another research question. And basically, this is a different presentation. So you have a problem, and then you review the literature, you read up as much as you can, and then you set your research questions, objectives, and hypotheses. You choose the study design, you decide on your sampling design, and then the process of data collection, because without data, we cannot really make valid conclusions. And then processing and analyzing data, and of course, writing. For this particular graphics, they stop at writing. For figure 6, it's basically the entire process, because in research, we don't want to just stop at writing. Many times in the past, a lot of the research results are just placed in shelves. We don't want that to happen. There are many valuable research findings done by students, undergraduate students and graduate students in CMU, and I think it's really high time for us to think about sharing them in many different platforms. When it comes to research problems and objectives for the actual thesis studies, many students actually have funny stories of being problematic over research problems. To illustrate, let me read this simple conversation. Student: dako kay kog problema ma. Mother: ha? Unsa man nak? Wala man good ko'y problem. Mama: ha? Naunsa ka? Now, please be cautious, because you're studying from home this semester. Do make sure that when you have this kind of conversation with your family members, you complete the phrase thesis problem, because we don't want your family members thinking of other concerns. But come to think of it, why are we getting severely stressed, or most of students getting severely stressed over their possible thesis research? We just went through several slides reminding every one of you that there are so many research opportunities in agriculture. And there are just still many questions unanswered, and there are still many problems that are not fully addressed. And because our discipline is very dynamic, there are also many new interesting things and ideas that can be pursued for research. And if you look at this figure here, that figure is shaped like a sundial, and I like that representation. This figure could serve as a simple guide for you to sift through possible research ideas. And hopefully after the midterms, you would have some clear and concrete ideas to propose to your thesis advisors. But going back, okay, our field is agriculture. This is our basic roots and foundation. You have chosen crop science as your major discipline, and either you are pursuing agronomy or plant breeding. And for the other majors, either horticulture as your major field of specialization. And so the first question that you should really raise, just like what I have directed you in the first learning activity for the laboratory, is for you to identify what is your crop of interest. And if you're interested of more than one crop, then what are your crops of interest? And basically, you start from there. And if you go back to the figure, you could eventually choose your research topic. You could narrow it down and eventually find a very specific niche. And then you can identify a research problem, develop clear research questions. We will have discussion on this later in the next slides. Create a research design to answer them, and then voila, you could be doing your research proposal in a breezier way.